The streets were a cruel place for a dog with no home. Max, a scruffy golden retriever mix, had spent months wandering the alleys of the small town, searching for scraps and warmth. His ribs pressed against his matted fur, a silent testament to his struggles. People passed him by, sometimes tossing him a piece of bread, but more often than not, they ignored him entirely. Then one day, something strange happened. A kind-hearted woman named Lisa noticed Max doing something peculiar. He had found a half-eaten sandwich near a cafe, but instead of gobbling it down as any starving dog would, he gently picked it up in his mouth and trotted away with determination. Intrigued, Lisa decided to follow him. Max moved with purpose, his tail wagging slightly as he crossed the road and disappeared into the nearby forest. Lisa trailed behind, careful not to startle him. Deeper and deeper he went, until he reached a clearing surrounded by thick trees. What she saw made her gasp. Nestled among the fallen leaves was a litter of tiny puppies, barely old enough to open their eyes. Their frail bodies huddled together, shivering in the cold. Max set the sandwich down before them and nuzzled each one with a tenderness that made Lisa's heart ache. This wasn't just any stray dog. He was a father, doing everything he could to keep his pups alive. Lisa's eyes filled with tears as she watched Max tear the sandwich into tiny pieces, offering them to the puppies. The little ones, weak and hungry, eagerly accepted the food. He had been scavenging, not for himself, but for them. Determined to help, Lisa retreated quietly and returned later with blankets, fresh food, and a warm heart. She set the food down and backed away, giving Max space. Hesitant at first, he sniffed the meal before nudging the pups toward it. They ate ravenously, their tiny tails wagging for the first time in what must have been days. Lisa knew she couldn't leave them there. Over the next few days, she gained Max's trust, visiting every morning with food and speaking to him in soothing tones. Slowly, he began to trust her. Then, one crisp morning, he did something unexpected. He walked toward her, tail wagging slightly, and nudged her hand. Taking it as a sign, Lisa gently placed a leash around his neck and scooped up the puppies one by one into a soft basket. To her surprise, Max didn't resist. He simply walked beside her, as if he knew she was there to help. At the animal shelter, Max and his pups received medical attention, warm beds, and all the love they had missed out on. The puppies thrived under care, growing stronger each day. But Max, despite his new home, often glanced toward the forest, as if remembering the struggle that had defined his life. Word spread quickly about the heroic homeless dog who had cared for his puppies against all odds. A local family, moved by his devotion, came forward to adopt him, and they insisted on taking in his puppies too. Max, now clean, healthy, and adored, finally had the home he had always deserved. Though the days of hunger and cold were behind him, one thing remained unchanged: his heart. A heart so full of love, it had endured suffering just to protect the ones he loved. Max had found his happy ending, but it was he who had taught the world a lesson. That love, in its purest form, asks for nothing in return but gives everything it has. As the months passed, Max's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. No longer the gaunt, desperate stray, he now had a soft golden coat that gleamed in the sunlight. His days were filled with love, companionship, and boundless energy as he played in the family's spacious backyard with his growing puppies. But Max never forgot the kindness he had received. One evening, as Lisa visited him at his new home, she noticed something peculiar. Max stood by the back door, gazing toward the forest in the distance. His tail wagged softly, but there was something else in his eyes, a longing, a remembrance of his old life and those who still struggled as he once had. Lisa had an idea. She spoke with Max's new family, who readily agreed. They decided to take Max back to town, not as a stray this time, but as a symbol of hope. Together, they visited shelters, advocating for abandoned animals. Lisa and Max's story inspired many, and soon, a small movement began. Rescue efforts increased, fostering programs expanded, and more stray dogs found homes. One day, as Max strolled through the town with Lisa, he suddenly stopped outside an alleyway. His ears perked up, and he let out a gentle whimper. Lisa followed his gaze, and there, curled up beside a garbage bin, was another homeless dog. A trembling, emaciated beagle mix. Without hesitation, Max approached, lowering himself to the ground and wagging his tail in a reassuring manner. Lisa knelt beside him, reaching out her hand. The stray, hesitant at first, sniffed the air and took a tentative step forward. It was as if Max knew. He had once been there, scared, hungry, and alone. But now he had the chance to help another, just as Lisa had helped him. With patience and kindness, they coaxed the beagle toward them, offering him a warm embrace and a promise of a better life. Max had not just found a home. He had become a guardian, a symbol of resilience and love. He had once carried food into the forest to save his family. Now he carried hope into the hearts of many, proving that kindness, no matter how small, could change the world. Years passed, and Max's legacy grew. The rescue movement that he and Lisa had started expanded beyond their small town. More shelters opened, more foster homes became available, and fewer dogs wandered the streets, forgotten and alone. Max continued his mission, visiting the shelter regularly. He became a therapy dog, offering comfort to both the abandoned animals and the volunteers who worked tirelessly to help them. His presence brought hope wherever he went. He greeted each new rescue with a wagging tail and kind eyes, as if to say, "You are not alone anymore." Lisa, now fully immersed in rescue work, often marveled at how one dog's selfless act had sparked such a change. She knew that Max's story would be told for generations, inspiring kindness and compassion for animals in need. And in the quiet of the night, as Max lay on his soft bed in his forever home, he no longer looked toward the forest with longing. Instead, he closed his eyes, surrounded by love, knowing that he had not only saved his own family, but had changed the world for so many others.
But it was Lucky who had saved him. The little dog had refused to give up, barking and digging at the ice until someone finally noticed. It was a testament to the bond between a dog and its owner, a bond that not even death could break. In the weeks that followed, Tom and Lucky became local heroes. The story of their survival spread far and wide, touching the hearts of everyone who heard it. Tom made a full recovery, and he and Lucky were inseparable, their bond stronger than ever. As for Emma and Max, they were hailed as heroes too. Max's bravery had saved Jake's life, and Emma's quick thinking had brought the divers to the lake. The town of Willowbrook came together to celebrate their courage, holding a special ceremony in their honor. But for Emma, the greatest reward was seeing the look of gratitude in Tom's eyes as he hugged Lucky close. It was a reminder of the power of love and loyalty, and the incredible things that can happen when we refuse to give up on those we care about. And so the story of the dog who refused to leave the frozen lake became a legend in Willowbrook, a tale of hope, courage, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their furry companions. It was a story that would be told for generations, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a reason to believe in miracles. Max turned and began to pull, his strong muscles straining against the weight of the rope. The crowd on the shore watched in awe as Max dragged Jake and the terrier back to safety, inch by agonizing inch. When they finally reached the shore, the crowd erupted into cheers. Emma rushed forward, throwing her arms around Max and burying her face in his fur. "You brave, brave boy," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Jake untied the rope and handed the terrier to Mrs. Henderson, who wrapped it in a warm blanket. The little dog was shivering but otherwise unharmed. It looked up at Jake with grateful eyes as if to say thank you. But the story didn't end there. As the crowd began to disperse, Jake noticed something strange. The terrier, now warm and dry, was still whining and pulling at the blanket as if it wanted to go back to the lake. "What's wrong with him?" Emma asked, her brow furrowed in concern. Jake shook his head. "I don't know. But I think there's more to this than meets the eye." Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Jake called in a team of divers from the nearby city. The divers arrived within the hour, equipped with all the necessary gear to explore the icy depths of Crystal Lake. As the divers prepared to enter the water, the terrier became increasingly agitated. It barked and pulled at its leash, its eyes fixed on the spot where it had been digging at the ice. The first diver, a woman named Sarah, slipped into the water with practiced ease. The cold was biting, even through her wetsuit, but she pushed through it, focusing on the task at hand. She swam down to the bottom of the lake, her flashlight cutting through the murky water. What she found there left her breathless. The small town of Willowbrook was known for its picturesque winters. Nestled in a valley, surrounded by snow-capped mountains, the town transformed into a winter wonderland every December. The frozen lake at the edge of town, aptly named Crystal Lake, was a popular spot for ice skating, fishing, and the occasional winter festival. But this year, the lake would become the center of a story that would touch the hearts of everyone who heard it. It all began on a bitterly cold morning in mid-January. The temperature had plummeted overnight, and the air was so crisp it seemed to crackle with every breath. The townsfolk were used to the cold, but this was different. A deep, biting chill that made even the hardiest residents think twice before venturing outside. Among those brave souls was Emma, a young woman in her late 20s who had grown up in Willowbrook. Emma was an avid runner, and despite the freezing temperatures, she laced up her boots and headed out for her morning jog. Her loyal golden retriever Max trotted happily beside her, his breath forming little clouds in the frosty air. As they approached Crystal Lake, Emma noticed something unusual. A small crowd had gathered near the edge of the ice, their voices hushed but urgent. Curious, Emma jogged closer, with Max following closely behind. She recognized a few faces, neighbors, friends, and even the town's mayor, Mr. Thompson. They were all staring out at the frozen lake, their expressions a mix of concern and confusion. "What's going on?" Emma asked, her voice cutting through the cold air. Mr. Thompson turned to her, his face pale. "It's Max," he said, pointing toward the center of the lake. "Not your Max, but, well, you'll see." Emma followed his gaze and her heart skipped a beat. There, in the middle of the frozen lake, was a dog. It was a scruffy-looking terrier, its fur matted and dirty. The dog was pacing back and forth, occasionally stopping to paw at the ice and let out a series of desperate barks. "How long has he been out there?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "At least an hour," replied Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived nearby. "I saw him when I came out to feed the birds. He won't come back to shore no matter what we do. We've tried calling him, offering food, but he just keeps barking and digging at the ice." Emma's heart ached as she watched the little dog. She could see the fear and determination in its movements. It was clear that the dog wasn't just lost or confused, it was trying to tell them something. Without thinking, Emma took a step onto the ice. "I'm going to get him," she said firmly. "Emma, no." Mr. Thompson grabbed her arm. "The ice is too thin out there, it's not safe." Emma hesitated, torn between her desire to help the dog and the very real danger of the situation. She looked down at Max, who was whining softly, his eyes fixed on the terrier. It was as if he understood the urgency of the situation. Just then, a voice called out from behind them. "I'll go." Everyone turned to see Jake, the town's fire chief, striding toward them. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a kind face and a reputation for being fearless in the face of danger. In his hands, he carried a long rope and a life preserver. "Jake, are you sure?" Emma asked, her voice filled with relief and worry. "I've done this before," Jake said with a reassuring smile. "We'll get him back, don't worry." Jake tied one end of the rope around his waist and handed the other end to Mr. Thompson. "Hold on to this," he instructed. "If anything happens, pull me back." With that, Jake stepped onto the ice, moving slowly and carefully. The crowd watched in tense silence as he made his way toward the dog. The terrier continued to bark and paw at the ice, seemingly oblivious to Jake's approach. When Jake was within a few feet of the dog, he stopped and crouched down, speaking in a calm, soothing voice. "Hey there, buddy. It's okay. I'm here to help." The dog turned to look at him, its eyes wide and pleading. For a moment, it seemed as though the dog might bolt, but then it let out a soft whine and took a tentative step toward Jake. "That's it," Jake said gently. "Come on. Let's get you out of here." But just as Jake reached out to grab the dog, the ice beneath him gave a loud crack. The crowd gasped as Jake's foot broke through the surface, sending a spray of icy water into the air. Jake quickly shifted his weight, spreading his arms to distribute it more evenly, but the damage was done. The ice around him was unstable, and he knew he couldn't risk going any further. "Jake, come back," Emma shouted, her voice filled with panic. Jake hesitated, his eyes darting between the dog and the shore. He knew he couldn't leave the dog out there, but he also knew that if he stayed, he might not make it back. It was then that Max, Emma's golden retriever, decided to take matters into his own paws. Before Emma could stop him, Max bounded onto the ice, his powerful legs carrying him swiftly toward Jake and the terrier. "Max, no!" Emma screamed, her heart pounding in her chest. But Max didn't stop. He reached Jake in a matter of seconds, his tail wagging furiously. Jake, realizing what Max was trying to do, quickly tied the rope around the dog's harness. "Good boy, Max," Jake said, giving him a pat on the head. "Now, go!" Max turned and began to pull, his strong muscles straining against the weight of the rope. The crowd on the shore watched in awe as Max dragged Jake and the terrier back to safety, inch by agonizing inch. When they finally reached the shore, the crowd irrew. There, lying on the lake bed, was a car. It was an old sedan, its windows shattered and its body covered in a thick layer of algae. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Inside the car, Sarah could see the faint outline of a person. Her heart pounding, Sarah signaled to her team. They quickly set to work, using ropes and pulleys to haul the car to the surface. It was a slow and difficult process, but eventually, the car broke through the ice and was pulled onto the shore. The crowd, which had gathered once again, watched in stunned silence as the divers pried open the car door. Inside, they found the body of a man. He was pale and lifeless, his skin almost translucent from the cold. But as the divers carefully lifted him out of the car, they noticed something miraculous. He was still breathing. "Call an ambulance!" Jake shouted, his voice filled with urgency. The man was rushed to the hospital, where he was treated for hypothermia and other injuries. It was a miracle that he had survived, trapped in the freezing water for who knows how long. As the town waited for news, the terrier, now named Lucky, stayed by Emma's side. It was clear that the dog had been trying to save its owner, refusing to leave the lake until help arrived. When the man finally regained consciousness, he told his story. His name was Tom, and he had been driving home from work one night when he lost control of his car on the icy road. The car had skidded off the road and plunged into the lake, sinking to the bottom before he could escape. He had been trapped there for days, surviving on the air trapped inside the car and the sheer will to live.